Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Jack Douglas. The motto of the state of Michigan translates from Latin as follows: if you seek a pleasant peninsula, look about you. Well, as these snapshots indicate, the word pleasant is, I think, an understatement. The word pleasureful is far more descriptive, especially to vacationers. Well, whatever the season may be, whatever your idea of the perfect vacation, you can't go wrong if you decide to get away from it all in Michigan, the Pleasure Peninsula. As we can see from our map outline, Michigan is actually two peninsulas, Upper and Lower Michigan. The state is bordered by 4 of the 5 Great Lakes, some 3,251 miles of freshwater shoreline, the longest in the world. It has 11,000 inland lakes, 36,000 miles of rivers and streams, 4 times as much water-covered area as any other state. And hear this, no point in Michigan is more than 6 miles from a river or lake. No wonder the state is called America's Water Wonderland. Speaking of water, this beach is considered the most beautiful in all the state, running some 20 miles north and 20 miles south of Muskegon on the shores of Lake Michigan. The sand is fine-grained, clean, and soft. The Great Lakes are well named. Straight ahead, there's nothing but water. Presque Isle Lighthouse, they pronounce it Eel, not Isle, overlooks Presque Isle Harbor on Lake Huron. But the unusual thing is that this is the only privately owned lighthouse in America. Built in 1840, it was abandoned in 1870 when a new lighthouse was built about a mile north. It remained a ghostly sentinel until the 1930s, when the lighthouse was purchased from the government by Mr. Francis Stebbins, who restored the property to its original condition.
I fell in love with the lighthouse as a young boy. I climbed the winding stair to the top and saw the boats going north and south. I'm so happy to share this little part of Americana with everybody.
To share this part of Americana, you will pay only a couple of pennies as a token fee, just enough to enable Mr. Stebbins to keep up with the expense of maintaining this privately owned lighthouse. You can climb the winding stairs to the top, look out over the vastness of Lake Huron, and even operate the beacon light. Well, a young boy fell in love with a lighthouse, and when he grew older, he bought it from the United States government. It can happen in America. At Welch's Dock in Sault Ste. Marie, you can begin a most enjoyable 2-hour boat cruise through the famous Soo Locks. Sounds dull? Don't you believe it. You'll follow in the wake of the giant cargo freighters. You'll experience a literal lift of 21 feet from the level of Lake Huron to that of Lake Superior, and on the Canadian side, you'll pass our neighbors from the north. They're just as impressed as we are by the complexity of the Soo Lock system and the magnitude of Great Lakes shipping. And huge log booms a mile in circumference are common sights along the way. The fare for these Soo Lock cruises is $2.50 for adults, $1 for children from 6 to 12, and children under 6 are admitted free. Welch's Soo Tours at Sault Ste. Marie in Upper Michigan, near the Canadian border. Believe it or not, this beautiful Blue Water Cove is the entrance to a ghost town. Once the town of Fayette, and now a part of the Fayette State Park. This iron ore sample weighing 400 pounds is a direct clue to how a boom town became a ghost town in the span of 30 years. In the late 1800s, Michigan experienced a tremendous iron boom, and this was selected as an ideal smelting spot. Plenty of limestone for construction of furnaces and kilns, and thousands of acres of hardwood forests, wood to provide the charcoal needed for the smelting process. Well, at the peak of the boom, Fayette became the second largest producer of pig iron in Michigan. Then in 1892, the Fayette iron boom had ended. The 500 residents of the town packed up and left, but left behind the ghostly memories of a fascinating chapter in Michigan's history. The Black River Parkway will take you to the Ottawa National Forest in Ironwood, Michigan, and here is unspoiled splendor almost without parallel. The Black River drops 1,000 feet from its source in the highlands to Lake Superior in the course of just 30-odd miles. The area is dotted with falls, and 2 of the 5 major ones are only 800 feet apart, but contrasting in form. This is Gorge Falls. And here the swirling patterns of Potawatomi Falls. This attractive swinging bridge permits visitors to cross over to a viewing platform. The visitors are Hank Vandenberg, his wife, and 2 daughters. And from the bridge, you can look out over Black River Harbor, where the swiftly moving current empties into Lake Superior. This tantalizing, secluded section of Lake Superior is at the edge of Porcupine State Park in northwest Michigan. And from the cliffs of the park, you can really appreciate the size of the lake. Really, it's as big as many of the world's best-known seas. The cliff walkers are Michiganders, Mr. and Mrs. Ted Skirta of Harper Woods. Also at Porcupine Park, this high bluff overlooks the legendary Lake of the Clouds. It's one of the most isolated lakes in the state, virtually inaccessible unless you're a good climber-downer. This creek carries away the overflow from the Lake of the Clouds. Tahquamenon Falls on the river of the same name is the best-known waterfall in Upper Michigan. Those rusty brown streaks in the water, by the way, are caused mainly by ore and mineral deposits. Isle Royale is 48 miles from the northern tip of Upper Michigan in Lake Superior. Park Service boats make the trip in 6 hours, but to save time, we went by seaplane from the mainland to the island in just 25 minutes. Isle Royale is a national park and the largest of Lake Superior Islands, 45 miles long and 9 miles across at its widest point. For those of us who like to rough it in comfort, there are numerous government-owned lodges renting rooms at reasonable rates. These visitors are Mr. and Mrs. Stephen Veers of Columbus, Ohio. Incidentally, some 200 small islands surround Isle Royale. We followed Steve and Joe Ellen on a trek to the Rock Harbor Lighthouse. Now, this lighthouse, if it could speak, would tell a tragic tale. In 1885, shortly after the light had been abandoned, the steamship Algoma ran aground in the pitch darkness. 40 men lost their lives. But Isle Royale is a happy as well as a lovely and a perfect setting for vacationers like Barbara Davis of Topeka, Kansas. She made a quick sketch of the lighthouse just for our cameras, and with a smile like that, who could refuse buying the painting? Of the permanent residents on Isle Royale, one of the most interesting is Mr. Peter Edison, a commercial fisherman. Born in Norway, Peter has lived on the island since 1916. He sells his catch, mostly lake trout and whitefish, to the tourist lodges in the area. And he told us that Isle Royale reminds him of the fjords of his native Norway, that he loves living here and wouldn't leave the place for any reason. The children and you will want to stop at Game Haven near Wolverine, Michigan. And as the name implies, it's a haven for wildlife and one of its many attractions is a large buffalo herd, including this one, Charlie by name, weighing well over a ton, and one of the biggest buffalo or bison bulls in captivity. Game Haven also has many foreign species of deer and antelope, and they seem to thrive and multiply in Michigan's climate. Visitors are encouraged to feed the deer fresh green leaves, and in this one enclosure we saw 4 different species: the Sikh, the English spotted, the European brown, and the Australian white. Yes, there are also reindeer at Game Haven and the white Siberian elk, one of the few of its kind in this country. And if you're up on your westerns, those are pure longhorns, a touch of Texas and Michigan, all at Game Haven near Wolverine. Ironwood in Upper Michigan will also appeal to the young in heart, for smack in the center of town is this enormous statue of Hiawatha, reminding us that this part of Michigan is sometimes referred to as Hiawatha country, the kind of setting Longfellow had in mind when he composed his sing-song stanzas of Gitche Gumee and the Big Sea Water. Anyway, Ironwood's Hiawatha stands 52 feet tall. He's made of colored fiberglass braced with steel and will withstand winds up to 140 miles per hour. No chance of his toppling over. And these youngsters will never, never forget this moment. Yes, now we're in Holland, Michigan, and to be exact, at the picturesque Dutch village. This wasn't the tulip season, but the dahlias were in bloom. Miss Marilyn Rosema is a native of this Holland, USA, but her grandparents migrated from Holland in Europe many years ago. And in Europe's Holland, lucky is the house that can boast of a real nesting stork. Well, this isn't a real stork, but hereabouts it's considered a good luck omen all the same. After a few hours at Dutch Village, most people are inclined to say, looks just like a Hollywood movie set, doesn't it? Well, maybe so. There's even a touch of make-believe in the air. But all that is here is a copy of a charming country across the Atlantic. So it's not too difficult to imagine that you're not in America, but in a tiny village just outside Amsterdam. An added treat when you journey to This is the skyline of Detroit as you would see it from Windsor, Canada, on the opposite bank of the Detroit River. Windsor, by the way, is the only place in Canada where you look north to see the USA. Woodward Avenue is Detroit's most attractive downtown street and the first street in America to try the electric traffic light system. In front of the city-county building on Woodward, you'll probably want to take snapshots of this fine sculpture by Marshall Fredericks. The statue represents God holding the destiny of man in one hand and the power of the universe in the other. Lakeshore Road parallels the Detroit River and runs through the heart of Grosse Pointe, Detroit's ultra-fashionable residential area. Here live many of the so-called first families of the city and some that are among the first families of the nation. But now, just a few minutes from Detroit, we'll visit the #1 tourist attraction in all the state, Greenfield Village, established in 1929 by Henry Ford. The Ford Museum building at Greenfield is a replica of Philadelphia's Independence Hall. And another building is a copy of an old London jewelry shop, and Ford had it duplicated because he was fond of clocks and all manner of ingenious mechanical things. But the preservation of Americana was Henry Ford's burning passion and the reason behind Greenfield. The candle maker is just one of many shops at Greenfield's Street of American Shops. And here Mrs. Marie Hutton is making bayberry candles, so named because the wax is derived from melting the berries of the bayberry bush, the same source of wax used by many of the old-time candle makers. Also on the street of shops, the milliner's store recreates the atmosphere and the styles of a century ago. And then, as now, buying a new hat required a great deal of time on the part of the customer and an awful lot of patience on the part of the clerk. The hat show that follows features authentic styles of the past. Well, what are you going to do? The Henry Ford birthplace, a small two-story wooden house, was moved to Greenfield from the original site, the family farm about 2 miles away. And in this garage, which once stood at the rear of a boarding house in Dearborn, is where Ford built his first cars. Now, only after he had completed his first car did the inventor realize he couldn't get the car through the narrow doorway, so he had to tear down the side of the garage. Yes, that actually happened to the great Henry Ford. This is the second car made by him in 1898. The first car, practically a twin, is sealed under glass at the Ford Museum. Each of the headlights had a wick and burned kerosene oil, and this was the steering wheel, the tiller bar. Yes, in this garage was born America's most important single industry. The genius that was Henry Ford admired and respected genius in others, among them Orville Wright of the Wright Brothers, sometimes referred to as the Henry Fords of aviation. Ford personally supervised restoration at Greenfield of the Wright Brothers Cycle Shop in Dayton, Ohio, the birthplace of the flying machine that was to find its fame in those brief but glorious seconds at Kitty Hawk. Then a few years later, in 1908, Orville Wright was at the controls of a vastly improved machine, and a new horizon was now within the grasp of man. And among all men, Henry Ford's admiration for Thomas Alva Edison was absolutely boundless. Stick by stick, Ford acquired and reconstructed Edison's original laboratory at Menlo Park. And from this laboratory came the first light bulb and glass mechanism used to exhaust the air from the bulb before igniting it. It was complicated, but remember, this was just the first step, and it worked. Edison, and not Alexander Bell, invented the telephone carbon button microphone. Bell did invent a superior receiver, then bought out Edison's interest in the microphone. In this 1878 Brady photograph, the young Edison is shown with his tinfoil phonograph. Yes, he also invented the photograph, and this original model at Greenfield is a priceless collector's item. The voice is reciting, "Mary Had a Little Lamb." The words aren't easy to understand, but for the first time, man's voice could be preserved for posterity. Listen. Edison sat in this very chair during the Greenfield dedication ceremonies in 1929. When he stood up, Mr. Ford ordered the chair nailed to the spot, and here it has remained ever since, a symbol of Henry Ford's enormous respect for America's and the world's greatest inventor. No, we're not on the Mississippi. We're still at Greenfield, giving the youngsters a peek at the paddle wheeler, Swanee. All we're trying to prove is that at Greenfield Village, there is much that is of interest to every member of the family. In Detroit, as in most of the Great Lakes cities, you can book passage on steamships that tour these huge inland seas. These week-long steamship sailings cruise 2,200 miles of the Great Lakes, and you'll enjoy 7 days and nights of scenic splendor. We've boarded the steamship South American for a short holiday weekend cruise, leaving Detroit Saturday at 9:30 a.m. We're going to cruise Lake St. Clair, the St. Clair River, Lake Huron, and finally the Straits of Mackinac and colorful Mackinac Island. We pass cargo vessels by the dozen, lots of waving and cheering, and since we're only human, we sort of envy the people who own these lovely summer homes on the St. Clair River. At night, there's entertainment aboard ship, everything from Charleston dancers to pom-pom girls and singers. Well, this was something we hadn't been told about, and as the saying goes, there's no show like a free show, so our fellow passengers joined us in a big hand for the entertainers. The SS South American sights Mackinac Harbor at about 2 p.m. the next day, Sunday. Incidentally, as I'm sure you know, Mackinac is spelled Mackinac, ending in AC. But as we were repeatedly cautioned aboard ship, Michiganders pronounce it Mackinac. A city ordinance prohibits the operation of private automobiles, so Mackinac and its countless vacationers depend upon horse-drawn vehicles, mostly carriages, for transportation. But Mackinac in the summer is a wide-awake town. Little Bob's is a restaurant that stays open until 4 a.m. And this fudge shop inspired youngsters to call all tourists fudgies because they say they walk around the streets eating fudge candy all day long. And even the milkman joins the festive spirit at Old Mackinac. Since the city fathers won't allow cars, the vacationer learns to pedal. And the bellhops from the different hotels also use bikes, but frankly, they'd prefer gas carts. Even at the dock, there isn't a cab or anything resembling a motor vehicle in sight. But do the girls and women mind? Not on your life. They see that horse-drawn carriage with a driver resplendent in red, black, and white, and they just know they'll have something to talk about when they go back home. This now is the Grand Hotel at Mackinac, and in every way, it lives up to its name. And talk about red carpet treatment, that walk is red, red, red. At night, you can gaze in wonder at the Mackinac Bridge, 5 miles long, and connecting Upper and Lower Michigan. Well, we have called Michigan the Pleasure Peninsula, and pleasureful it is for the hunter, the skier, the fisherman, the yachtsman, but there is a quiet kind of pleasure here, especially in the autumn and winter, that is even more appealing to the visual senses, the pleasure of sheer beauty. And as these snapshots indicate, Michigan has it with lots to spare. It is from every point of view, truly, the Pleasure Peninsula. A closing note about Mackinac Island, ladies and gentlemen. Be sure to visit the historic Mackinac Fort, originally built in 1780 and preserved exactly as it appeared at that time. Now, because of its glorious background, many historians rate it the most historic spot in the Midwest. Also, don't overlook the fantastic Grand Sable Sand Dunes at Lake Superior. Now, until next week, Jack Douglas saying thank you so much and good night, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls.